You're listening to the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, your host, Ben Eagle. Please remember to subscribe to the show wherever you are listening. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 185 of the Meet the Farmers podcast with me, Ben Eagle. Now, I think I've done over 400 interviews now, but there are always some that I'm more nervous for than others. And today is one of those because I'm speaking to the man, the legend, the farmer, the consultant that is Reach-End Ben Taylor Davies, who, although this is the first time that we've met, his reputation goes before him. I remember talking to my mate, our mate actually, Will Evans, after Will visited Ben's farm, I think last year. And he said, it was one of the, and I quote here actually, he said it was one of the most impressive places that he'd ever seen. Mind you, I'm not entirely sure how often Will gets out of Wales, so I'm not sure really what that means, but
absolutely. Yeah.
Joking aside, though, the CV for this man's farm is impressive to say the least. Townsend Farm consists of 220 hectares just outside Ross-on-Wye in Herefordshire, and there is everything at this place from arable crops to every farm animal you can probably imagine. A vineyard, a shop, brewery, fermentary, glamping site, wormery, wedding venue, a shoot, and even a chaos garden. According to Ben's website, he is, and I quote, possibly the first proclaimed bioagroecologist, a straight-talking husband, father, farmer, consultant, public speaker, Nuffield scholar, and Oxford Farming Conference director. Following a degree in geography and paleontology at the University of Liverpool, Ben became an agronomist, working for Hutchinson's for several years. His Nuffield scholarship focused on blackgrass, although a lot more besides, and his travels took him to an impressive 14 different countries, including Chile, Belarus, Australia, and numerous US states. The decision to do the Nuffield came in the aftermath of a dark time in Ben's life, triggered by a terrible accident involving a horse and his then 16-month-old son, Jobe. This understandably had an enormous impact on the lives of Ben and all the family. The Nuffield led on to multiple changes on his own farm in Herefordshire, but also to Ben's mindset, and he is a fervent proponent of regenerative agriculture, regenerating minds as well as soil. When he's not on his farm or on another farm doing consultancy or doing the many millions of other things that he does, he enjoys cooking, watching sport, and spending time with Helen, his wife, and their 3 children, Tegan, Erin, and Jobe. That's enough from me. Ben, welcome to Meet the Farmers. How is your week going?
Good. I think you've just summed it all up. Do we need to do any more?
Should we go now?
Yeah.
No.
Week's going very well.
Good. I'm glad. I'm not surprised. Yeah. So let's dive in, really. So in the most recent episode of your podcast, Farming for Change, with James Smith, and James was actually speaking with Hannah at the time, and you weren't actually on that one, but James described you as a complete ideas man. So I just wondered how you would describe yourself, and in reference to James's description, have you always been a complete ideas man?
Yes, I have. I guess. I mean, my mind never just. Me and Helen have these great conversations because Helen is polar opposite, and I think essential part of why we're so great as a team.
Yeah,
Helen can actually sit there with nothing. As she explains, there's nothing going on in her mind. She's literally just, I don't know, cotton wool clouds, who knows what. But she says she's not thinking of anything. I can't do that. And I've realised I'm probably the exception rather than the norm, but for nearly 40 years, that was a real problem, really, for a lot of things, because I couldn't understand why people couldn't really start putting 16 ideas together and working out, actually, if you do 1 plus the 4th and then the 8th, and then you added back to the 2nd and then brought in the 16th idea and put them all together in the mixing pot, that it all worked out quite well. And by the time I thought it through, the plan was there. And then trying to describe it, it's so hard to describe what's in your head. And until you've actually created it, and they say, there. And they're like, oh, okay, get it now.
Yeah. So do you find that when you have an idea, you have to either, well, first get it down on paper, but how many of your ideas actually happen? Do you feel like, oh, I've got an idea, I have to make it happen? Or are you able to actually just take an idea and then say, no, that's fine, I can just let that go?
It depends on the ideas. Some of the ideas stay in your mind, and you keep thinking about it, and I never write them down actually, which is rather quite tragic. No, it's all still in my head.
They're all still there.
So a lot of the ideas you work through and then realize actually that doesn't work for X, Y, and Z. So you try and come up with every reason why it shouldn't work. I've kind of got these little, not voices, but you know what I mean, in your head, that you come up with an idea and you say, right, now name every reason why that wouldn't work. And then if you can't think of that many, then every reason why it could work, and then the practicalities of making it work is probably where my mind is really. That's probably the reason I wake up at 3 a.m. every morning and begin thinking immediately. It's until my eyes close at night, I'm still the same. It's probably not very healthy, if I'm honest. I don't know. But now that I've sort of not in constraints of employment and not in constraints on the farm so much, and not in constraints, of course, being able to use these ideas, and some of them are great, and that sort of thing, and actually being able to do what's in your head and speak freely and do and act on things freely. Of course, it relieves an awful lot of tension in my own mind, sort of thing. We'll get to mental health, I'm sure, in a while. I think you mentioned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I think I asked those questions because I think it's important for the listeners to sort of see you with that context. I think it's so important to how you think in terms of what you do. But again, before we move on, can you just tell me a bit about your friendship with James as well? Because you met doing your Nuffields.
I'm not friends with James.
I just wanted to get that on record, but apparently you're not going to do it.
Yeah. No, James, I guess Nuffield. I mean, I'm going to paraphrase and do an awful lot of things that are probably totally incorrect, but Nuffield has a slight reputation for being elite farmers and food producers and that sort of thing, and they're very similar mold, shall I say. And then just occasionally they happen to let slip through a few rebels. So myself and James slipped through the net of these rebel farmers, that sort of thing, and just hit it off immediately, and always ended up in the naughty corner in the back of the classroom whenever we were, whatever we might have been doing with Nuffield, and giggling when we shouldn't have been giggling, and basically just doing exactly what I was doing at school, basically being a naughty schoolchild, really, and that sort of thing. And we just stayed in touch ever since. He's got an incredible dry sense of humor, the same as mine, very, very sarcastic, but like we both are. And and we just have good fun whenever we meet up. It's just immediately into the crack and great. So it's brilliant to have people, and of course, we kind of started on the same journey at exactly the same time. I remember sat around the kitchen table and we were talking, and I said, I'm out of this rat race. I'm on a different journey. And he said, unbelievable. I'm doing the same. And it was just that moment that you just think, right, wow, That's so of course you bounce and push each other and challenge each other, that sort of thing. And I think that's really important when you've got somebody that you can, say, well, what are you doing and why are you doing it, and why aren't you doing this? So that's pretty cool as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, listeners, if you want to hear some of that bouncing and challenging, go over and listen to the Farming for Change podcast. Recently, I've gone back to episode 1. I don't think I've listened to them all, but my God, I mean, you definitely go on a journey on each of those episodes. You never quite know where it's going to go, but it's a great listen. What is an average week for you? Because you wear many hats and you travel a lot as well.
I do. I mean, again, the beauty of the life I now lead is there is definitely not an average week, thankfully, with a mind like myself. Like I said, I talk about my mind a lot. It presents various challenges too, and certainly monotony is something I really struggle with. So the fact that every week is totally different, every week is full of challenges. I love being challenged about everything. Let my brain just try and come up with a solution. That's what I'm pretty good at. But my average week, I mean, if you're going to start on a Monday, because my weeks generally don't finish either. But on a Monday morning, wake up at 3, leave home at 4, and it could be anywhere in the UK, all Europe, or even the world these days. So, in the next 3 months, I'm in South Africa. I'm in the rest of Africa actually as well. I'm in Spain. I'm in Portugal. I'm in Oklahoma. I'm in Atlanta. I'm in Chile.
Lucky
and then,
Helen.
of course, yeah. And poor Hals has to run the farm and make sure everything carries on running. So yeah. Early start. Go and spend a day away, depending on where I end up now and how it's working out. Sometimes I stay away in hotels. I do try and make every effort to get back to see family. But if it means I'm going to get home at 11 o'clock at night when they're all asleep, except of course my eldest daughter, and have to leave again at 4 a.m. the following morning, there's not a lot of point. And of course, carbon and all these footprints that continually worry me. I'm talking to so many people about trying to improve the environment, improve their farming, improve their profitability, and everything else. And there I am driving around. So I am currently looking at electric cars, but because of the amount of miles I do, I'm going to have to stop halfway. Like this afternoon, I'm off to Grimsby. I probably wouldn't make it, which means another hour stop and charge and that sort of thing. So that's certainly on my mind. And then Tuesdays are great. Tuesdays my what I call my Banbury guys, 3 guys in Banbury that I've dealt with for 20 odd years through the whole standard agronomy, into more soils, into more regenerative, and I my Tuesdays is something that is just brilliant, and we have such a great fun because when you know somebody that long, they can challenge me harder and harder and harder, and that sort of thing. And then, the Wednesday, Thursday, Friday is again traveling wherever, consulting, that sort of thing. Evenings spent often giving talks and that sort of thing to anything from farmer groups to wildlife groups, history groups, believe it or not, and geology groups. And
Brilliant.
I've spoken to all of that sort of thing. And then Saturday and Sunday, I try and do a 40-hour week on the farm. So I do 20 hours on Saturday and 20 hours on Sunday on the farm, involving my children. I'm a very firm believer in that a family farm is not children not doing anything.
Yep.
Xbox and that sort of thing. No, we're very much actually we're on the farm. We're all on the farm together. We're not necessarily all working together at that time, but we're certainly all have our jobs and that sort of thing.
Yeah, and I think remembering back to a previous interview you did elsewhere, actually, I think you said that your childhood was very different to that.
Yeah, I mean, my father tragically, really, discouraged me from farming. Thought it was a lonely life. There was not a lot of money to be made. Just thought there was a better life elsewhere. I mean, it's tragic when you think about it, really. But yeah, totally discouraged me from becoming a farmer.
Yeah. What's your earliest memory? And does any of that sort of involve the farm?
Yeah, all my early memories involve the farm. That's I mean, one of my earliest memories, and I was only 4 or 5. I was riding in a potato harvester, the old Grimmy single row potato harvesters with a big cover over the top. And back in those days, used to bag the potatoes on the harvesters as you lifted them, and literally took them off on pallets bagged. And I fell asleep on an oil drum, leant up, just rocking away. And my father threw a potato at me. I'll never forget, and absolutely startled me. Woke up, didn't know where I was, what I was doing, sort of thing. So yeah, I've got lots of memories of the farm. It's incredible. Like when my father took me, he bought a new irrigation reel, and he had a motorbike at the time. We got on the back of the motorbike, and he drove purposely under the irrigation reel, that it was spraying water over the end. Got absolutely soaked. Yeah. So yeah.
Was there any stock on the farm when you were growing up?
Crikey, yeah. I mean, we're based in Herefordshire, very mixed farming area. So yeah, we had 500 breeding ewes. We had 100 head of cattle, not suckler herd, but just beef finishing. Well, actually, we reared calves right the way through to fat.
Okay.
So they were the 2 main animals on the farm. And then gradually through the 90s and into the 2000s, and I talk about this an awful lot, that isn't it incredible that in actual fact, we were encouraged to specialize to de-risk. So we all became wheat farmers or arable farmers first and foremost, get rid of the livestock. And livestock, you either became a livestock farmer or an arable farmer to de-risk because you were more of a specialist. And then in actual fact, it got even worse than that, that you then stopped growing various crops because you became either a potato specialist or a wheat growing specialist and that sort of thing. I think that was probably the riskiest thing you could ever possibly do to any farm business. But that was a policy at the time, wasn't it?
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, bringing that up to date, do you see, again, it's difficult, isn't it, certainly when we talk of regen ag and perhaps people who work, who have a regen system, perhaps talk to other people who are in a regen system. So actually taking that broader view is perhaps more difficult sometimes. But do you see a gradual shift towards more of a mixed approach, or are we seeing moving in two different directions, or how do you see the trajectory at the moment?
I mean, in the regen bubble that I live in, because I am perfectly honest and say, unfortunately now I don't get to see much of the wider farming community because I spend a lot of time with people that are either thinking about changing or certainly on the change.
Yeah.
The really interesting thing is often one of the first phone calls you have is, I've read some of your books or some of the books on your library and that sort of thing. Do I need livestock? I said, no, we can make a start. And do you know what I find most amazing is within 2 to 3 years, their livestock start arriving on farm because they start to realize actually the important. Now, whether that's just literally somebody else bringing livestock on and grazing cover crops and that sort of thing, or whether they're investing in their own livestock, I find it amazing. But all of a sudden, these mixed farms, it's a really essential part of soil health and soil building, assuming you're farming correctly and actually making the most out of your animal. In other words, making sure the animal is benefiting the everything you're doing.
We'll definitely go into more detail about that later, but I just want to bring it back to your story for a bit. You went to University of Liverpool, to study geography and paleontology. Other than I had an ex-girlfriend who studied paleo, but other than that and her very small group of friends and other people who did paleo at Bristol, I've never come, and Ross from Friends, I haven't come across any other paleos. So it's good to meet another paleo.
Yeah, I mean, my actual course was meant to be just straight geography. The beautiful thing about geography is you get to choose modules.
Yeah.
Of anything from oceanography right the way through to to so many things. And of course, I really enjoyed the paleontology. So
yeah,
90% of my course, believe it or not, was actually nothing to do with geography. It was paleontology. I loved it.
Right. And why? Yeah. Obviously, your dad discouraged you from going down the farming route. And again, in previous interviews, you've spoken about your geography teacher as well, who you still see.
Mrs. Miles.
Yeah, Mrs. Miles. I love that. But obviously, yeah. So you have a great interest. You've got the brain that you have, and you've got a great interest in the world, in physical geography. You've obviously got the farm interest as well. You finish this course, and I assume you go back to the farm, and then you have a discussion with your dad, and what happens?
He throws me a pile of Farmers Weekly and says, "Go and get a job." Literally.
Yeah.
That's another memory. It's not an early memory, but it's certainly a memory. I remember stood in the kitchen, and he literally threw a pile of Farmers Weeklies and said, No job for you here. Go and get a job. And I applied for 2 jobs, one in the Antarctic as a researcher, which was in the Farmers Weekly. It was odd. But those days you had to write letters. So I wrote the letter and never heard another thing back. So I presumed they obviously didn't like who I was. And the other letter was to Hutchinson's as a trainee agronomist.
Okay.
And after 3 interviews, I was offered a job there.
So I'm really interested in that. So you do your basis and your facts. You become an agronomist. I'm interested in your mindset then, and what was going through your mind during that time, in terms of your understanding and interest in the environment and in soil, compared to how you think now. Were there similarities, or was it a complete change? Do you feel like a different person?
I feel like a different person, but that's probably for many other reasons as well. It's a strain, very hard to explain, because at the same time, believe it or not, as I was working as an agronomist and started working as an agronomist, my father actually did step back from the farm a bit and said, well, you can manage it, but you can't live here or do anything like that. So the first thing I did is go into the countryside stewardship scheme, believe it or not, and we planted 12 kilometres of hedges. We put 6-metre margins in. We did an awful lot of environmental benefits because my father, for everything he was, intensive farm and that sort of thing, he always commented that the fact that hares used to be all over a farm and he hadn't seen one in 20 years, and lapwings always used to go and nest down by the river, and they always used to plant sugar beet and mark all the nests out with a pole so that they didn't ever disturb the lapwing nests, and they'd all gone. And hedgehogs, he said that, the farm used to be absolutely smothered in hedgehogs, and if we saw 2 a year, that's all he'd see. So, and grey partridge is the same as well. So there were lots of things that he definitely noticed, and was rather quite pleased when I said, I think we should be putting all these hedges back in and give nature a bit of a chance with margins. Interestingly enough, the connection between that, what I was doing, and soil came much, much later.
Right, okay.
Soil at the time was just a medium in which you grew crops. It just supplied a few nutrients and basically a substrate in which you could grow a plant. And that remained pretty much my mindset for another 10 years. Wow. So
okay.
It wasn't as though I think I was just disconnected from joining all the dots together, because I don't think anybody had quite shown me or explained how everything was so integrated, if you know what I mean. And it sounds ridiculous looking back, but I can only tell you what you're asking. So yeah,
no, completely.
And as an agronomist, not one day, and I think this would be every agronomist and every farmer, not one day did I go out trying to destroy the environment, trying to do more than make a client a living. In hindsight, lots wrong, but it was never the intention, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, we'll hold that thought for later as well. You married Helen in this time. You moved back to the farm. You had Tegan, Erin, and Jobe together. And then that fateful day came when Jobe had his accident. Can you take us back to that day?
I can. I remember it like it was yesterday, 28th of September 2012. It was a Friday. I'd finished work at about 2:30. And by now we were living back in a barn conversion back at the farm.
Okay.
My father had moved up Don, and he was running a wedding venue himself at the time, and all that sort of thing. So we were back at the farm. And I had a helper that used to come on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday. And never forget, we were putting some lights up in the workshop. Okay. And the other side of the workshop, there was a small paddock. And my wife at the time just started to breed horses. And we'd got some brood mares with some foals in that field. And we called it the show jumping paddock. So it had some show jumps in it and that sort of thing. And it just so happened there was and I don't know whether it was an agricultural event or there was an event down the road, and they asked if they could borrow our show jumps. And that never a problem. So Helen put the trailer on the back of the truck and drove into the field and had Jobe in the car seat, jumped out and started loading the jumps into the trailer. And as she was doing that, Jobe, the Houdini he was, and bearing in mind he had a thing called a Houdini strap on as well. Really? These things that were meant to stop. For those children that get out of car seats, there's also an extra strap you can put on above it called a Houdini that's meant to be absolutely foolproof. Jobe is living proof that they certainly are.
Yeah.
No. And she looked up because I was still in the barn, and he wrestled himself out of this thing, opened the car door and toddled off to these mares across the field. It was only, I don't know, 100 and something odd meters. Helen looked up, and as she looked up, this horse lashed out and kicked him on the side of the head on his right side, with such force that it smashed his skull here and exploded the skull out of the other side too.
Wow. God, I mean, it must be a miracle he survived.
Oh, yeah. Massive. So I then heard a scream, as that again, it's a scream, a mother's scream, like that is something you'll never forget either.
Yeah.
Horrific scream, and she had Jobe. She'd gone and scooped him up. She had a groom at the time as well, and they were like, "Call the ambulance." And I was like, I'm not waiting here for an ambulance. I'll take him to the hospital. Otherwise we got to wait. Again, my mind thinks differently. There was no way I could sit and wait for an ambulance to come out. And by the time the ambulance is coming, he'd probably died. And I never forget, we put him in the car, and I went to our local hospital at some kind of speed. And Helen was, I never forget, Helen looked across and she was like, I think we've lost him. I was like, oh. Ran into the hospital, all the alarm bells, they pressed the emergency button, and tried to do what they could in a local cottage hospital. You can imagine it. They haven't got the resources. Called for an air ambulance that arrived. It seemed to take for any time. Wait, took forever. The air ambulance arrived, and that took forever. When they arrived, because they were obviously trying to put me in a coma and all that sort of thing because it was that bad. Eventually took off with Helen and him to Birmingham Children's Hospital, and he was given less than 5% chance of survival.
5%.
It was when they showed me the first CT scan. That's when I lost it. Up to then, you couldn't cry. It was too bad. It was too serious, if you know what I mean. You literally couldn't. The emotionless, really, a shock. But when I saw the CT scan of the damage and all this black in his head, and they said, yeah, that's all dead tissue now. And then it started to explain that basically, brains don't repair. But being so young, he's still got an awful lot of brain cells that can be made up until you're about 21 and that sort of thing. And they basically said, look, what we're going to do is essentially turn him off. We've never done this before, but in America, we basically give the medication that basically turns the brain activity so low, because the problem is with the brain, of course, being in a skull, it's in a limited box. As the brain swells, the pressure builds, and the pressure is what kills you. If they've got to do a craniotomy and actually take some of that out, your brain oozes out, and who knows what comes out. So that they were like, that is something you never want to do. So he had this probe or bolt in his head measuring his pressure, and they said it's got to stay under 20. And for the first 3 weeks, it stayed at 22.
Wow.
Yeah. And of course, to stop him getting bed sores, they had to roll him. It'd go up to 38. Stress on the brain. So, and they had him in a jacket, a whole bodysuit that pumped cold water around him, so that all the blood that was going into his brain was cold blood to actually stop the swelling. They got all this medication to stop his brain activity functioning, and also obviously in a coma as well. So, yeah, it was. I can only describe that 1 second when your child is in intensive care fighting for its life feels like about 2.5 years of your life. I cannot. For the first 5 days, I couldn't even go in the room. I was pacing around outside. I couldn't face, this China doll of a child that was cold to touch. And so Helen and I had this WhatsApp conversation continuously. Those were in the days you could print out a WhatsApp conversation. I've got 700 pages of a WhatsApp conversation for the minute Joe went into hospital. Yeah. Never read it.
And of course, Tegan and Erin can't have been that old at that time either.
No, so Tegan, I think, was 8 and Erin was 5. So Erin literally had just started school. So what actually happened is Helen basically announced at the moment, she said, well, I'm not coming home without my boy. Fair enough, you need to be there. And I rang all my clients, I texted all my clients actually, and a great big group said, this is what's happened. You need to take care of yourselves essentially to a point, of which they were fantastic at just texting me a couple of questions when they needed to, and got on with an awful lot of it themselves, and it was brilliant. And I basically, what I would do is I used to take the girls to school in the morning, drop drive up to Birmingham, be with Helen and Jobe for the day. Now you can imagine for the first 2 or 3 weeks, we kept taking into what we called the little room, and said, look, he probably won't make tonight, so you better stay by his side. We had that conversation about 14 times, we think.
Oh my goodness, Ben.
Yeah, and it doesn't do a lot for your mental health, I'll tell you that. In later time, but at the time, you're living on adrenaline. You know, everyone's done how you cope. You cope because you have to, and you cope because there's no other. You're actually designed to cope, so that was never a problem for us. We had some amazingly humbling experiences. The day we were taken, we were there for 3 days. And then somebody said, "Oh, we've got you a room at the Ronald Macdonald house we'd never heard of the Ronald Macdonald house, and a lot of people haven't. A massive, essentially, hotel built next door to Birmingham Children's Hospital, and most children's hospitals all over the world, sponsored by Macdonald's, and it's basically a free hotel. They don't wait on you, but I mean, it is. When I was taken on a tour there, that's the first time I cried. I was just couldn't believe that some people had actually thought. I mean, it makes me think now. People had forethought how, because Birmingham's an hour from us. We didn't know where to stay, where to eat, anything sort of thing. You know, it was, and that was just one of those amazing things. This is your room for as long as Jobe is in hospital.
Brilliant.
And it was a room big enough for our 2 girls. So every weekend we'd go and stay in the Ronald Macdonald house. There were kitchens on every floor. There were books, you know, and I never forget pulling a book up and it said, "Why did my brother die?" On one of the books. Because what you have to remember is, you know, not every story is a happy story. And sometimes these books are, you know, have been written, you know, and how to explain to 2 girls aged 5 and 8. And I put that book, I'll never forget. I saw it and I put it on the top shelf and put it away. And I thought, that's not a story for us. But yeah, and all these things. So yeah.
So, I mean, that happened 10 years ago. The actual
yeah.
So
just over 11 years in September.
And you've been on a massive journey since then. What was the impact on you? And take me through your sort of experiences with your mental health since then.
So Jobe obviously survived. I presume people are aware of this. So Jobe unbelievably survived.
We should say that. Yeah, Jobe survived.
yeah. Jobe survived. Brain damaged, of course, but survived. And I never, like when we brought him home, because they turned his brain off, you wouldn't believe when they start removing these drugs, watching a brain come back online.
Yeah.
You know,
I assume he had to relearn everything.
Temperature regulation.
Yeah.
So he couldn't even control his own temperature. You know, we take granted, we sit at a temperature, and I mean, he was just up and down. Saliva production, gag reflex, all these things we watched, yawning, all these things we watched online. And to look back, it was horrific. But when we finally brought him home, he was still like a lump of jelly because obviously all his muscles had wasted away. We had to feed him thickened water because the speed of his, got the name of the flap at the back of your throat to stop you basically filling your lungs up with water when you drink. But that was still not functioning properly. So we had to thicken water so that it actually took a long enough time to actually shut and that sort of thing. So but he survived. So, and then basically what happened, we were on an incredibly long journey of recovery of Jobe. I mean, it's literally hour by hour, day by day, and we didn't know where. There was no roadmap, and that we certainly didn't know how and where we would. We were told he would have no motor skills in his arms, his hands, his arms, and his legs. We were told he'd possibly be mute. We were told he'd probably be deaf, and possibly blind as well. You know, it's just And funny enough, sorry, and I know you've just asked another question. I'll just go back to one time in that little, you know, the little room I said about, you know, when you're taken into the room and sat down and said, you know, things. One time they said we think he's going to survive, And you can imagine the elation. And then they said, but his quality of life, unfortunately, will not be high enough. So unfortunately, we will. And you can't believe how you can go from he's going to survive to his quality of life isn't going to be good enough. So in actual fact, we're going to have to let him go. So yeah.
Wow.
Anyway, so the journey beyond hospital, I sort of threw myself really into things like fundraising for Birmingham Children's Hospital. We raised a third of $1 million for a Jobe fellowship for children going into Birmingham Children's Hospital with brain injuries and that sort of thing. You know, what could we add? What do you need to learn? You know, we sponsored PhD students studying brain injuries, and in actual fact, we made a huge contribution to the protection of sight. Normally, anything with a brain injury cause blindness, and thankfully now it's much higher percentage of children actually keeping their sight, which is a fantastic outcome. And I sort of went back to work and kind of just carried on in some kind of form, all the while struggling. Really, the adrenaline had gone. He was going to survive. I never went through a period of mourning because he didn't die. And I ended up in a terrible mess, really mentally, looking back, of aggressive, you know, angry about what had happened, jealous for other people with families with kids that didn't have that sort of life. It just kept enveloping me and just dreadful. And then things like, you know, I'm using insecticides, killing stuff. I'm killing things with fungicides. I'm killing things with herbicides. You know, who am I to be the judge of what survives? And you know, I've sat and prayed to anything and anybody that might have listened that my son survived, but you know, indiscriminate killing of the environment and all that sort of thing. And and it was a downward spiral for an awful long time. It really was. It was horrific. I'm also got you know, dyslexia and ADHD and that sort of thing, and had all these ideas that I couldn't do anything with, and an overactive brain. And if your brain isn't being used in a, you know, my brain, when used correctly, is a phenomenal resource. When used incorrectly, is a destroyer.
Yeah,
destroyer of me, destroyer of families, and destroyer of other people. So yeah, and I'm talking up until about 2015, 3 years of hell. Awful to my wife, awful to my children, awful to me, awful to anybody really. And I can't begin to describe a lot of the things. So yeah, just couldn't get out of it. Real massive problem.
Yeah. I want to take a segue actually into Regen Ag here, because you've spoken widely about Regen Ag being as much about regenerating mines as well as regenerating the land. It's about a broader philosophy. And I suppose, what do you mean by regeneration of mines? And that's a massive question, but you have 2 minutes to answer that.
Okay, so very, very quickly. Interesting enough, plenty of studies being done. Amount of dyslexia on farm is something like 5 to 7 times the national average. And that's through natural selection. All farmers with their families, those that are academics, used to leave the farm and go and get a job, and anything that didn't actually stayed at the farm.
Yeah.
Now, whether you've got dyslexia or ADHD or on the spectrum, as it's now called, isn't it? You're blessed with a very, very, very great mind, as I call it. Different, but great. And what we're very great at is problem solving.
Yep.
You know, whether it's welding some pieces of machinery together, whether it's looking at a field and how we're going to get at that sort of thing. If you ever want something doing practical, ask a farmer, because they generally have either been in worse scenarios or not. So that they're very, very great. And what's happened in the last 30 to 40 years especially is the ability to need to think has been taken away from you. Machinery manufacturers now offer everything you ever need on a farm. Agronomists are giving you all the recipes for weed control and pest and disease, and seed merchants are selling you all the seeds that you need. Vets are giving you, again, everything you might ever need in a bottle or a packet and that sort of thing to overcome it. You don't need to think. And unfortunately, your mental health, as I said, becomes in the brains that we have, these problem-solving brains, you start thinking about your farm debt, you start thinking about your family, you start thinking, and unfortunately, because your brain needs to think, it starts taking all the wrong things to think about. And the beauty of regenerative agriculture is, because the first response is not for a packet, a can, or anything like that to solve, then in actual fact, it starts to use the very portion of your brain that you are blessed with. And therefore, in actual fact, finding solutions and the endorphins that are released when you find a solution to something that isn't a recipe, that isn't being told to you or preached, is actually quite phenomenal and becomes actually quite an addictive thing. So this is why I'm so keen on talking about regenerating your mind, that actually, when you're allowed to think, you might not be an academic, and let's be honest, most of us aren't brilliant at writing and that sort of thing, but the way farmers think outside the box, inside the box, who cares, or even redesigning the box, I just think that is the thing that actually sets farmers and farmers apart. And so by being a regenerative farmer, you get to use the very thing that you're blessed with.
Yeah. Let's turn to your Nuffield and how it impacted on you. So I mean, you had the journey of an absolute lifetime. I mean, possibly the most adventurous Nuffield. I think actually it is the most adventurous Nuffield that I've heard of. You went 14 countries. I've got a list of them here where we're at: Canada, US. I mean, loads of states in the US: Argentina, Chile, Peru, Uruguay, Paraguay, South Africa, Poland, Belarus, Russia, Mongolia, China, and Australia. You met Gabe Brown, amongst many others. How did the Nuffield change your way of thinking? Because you've explained you went through that incredibly dark time. You got to the stage. I mean, I'm amazed actually how you went through that shift of even applying for the Nuffield in the first place, having come out of that shift, because that's a massive thing in itself. But also, I mean, you didn't just study blackgrass on your travels, did you?
No. I mean, funny enough, so the Nuffield all came about. Helen was struggling with me more than anything, and basically said, "Look, you've lost your love of ag, you've lost your love of life, you've lost your love of pretty much everything. You know, you spoke years ago about a Nuffield. Why don't you go and do it, or certainly apply for one?" So I applied for a Nuffield scholarship, and I didn't want it. Yeah, I got awarded a Nuffield scholarship, and I still didn't want it. I went away and didn't want to go away to what they call the CSE and that sort of thing. I'll never forget in Ireland, just wanted to be at home, because at the time I was still believing that I needed to protect my family. I needed to be there as much as I possibly could. Yeah. And then the first trip was the Canada-US, 6 weeks. I was flying into Minot Airport in North Dakota, up to Canada, then back down, zigzagging across the whole of the States and flying eventually 6 weeks out of Houston, Texas, back. I didn't speak to anybody for a week before I left. And I never forget, Helen took me to Heathrow Airport. I'll never forget, I got out of the car, never said a word, grabbed my suitcase and walked into the airport, got on the flight, did what you do, and got a connecting flight and eventually got a hire car. And I sat in that hire car and I said, right, you're basically at a crossroads of your life here. You either mope around the US and Canada for the next 6 weeks wishing you're at home, or you've really just got to actually start thinking of how you can get your life together and make a change, make things right, and that sort of thing.
Yeah, travel does amazing things, doesn't it? Different context, different place, different mindset.
And unfortunately, I met some amazing people, including Gabe. Gabe was great, but there are some other people that people don't know so much about that are doing some really great stuff as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, tell us some people, tell us some names.
Tyler Strackham, a chap in Iowa, is just doing some amazing regenerative things. What I was meant to be out there for, as you know, is weed control, basically, blackgrass. But Well, so I'd set up quite a few appointments, and fortunately left an awful lot of space, because everyone said when you go there, the meetings that, and it's absolutely true, the meetings that you believe are going to be important, you get out of them exactly what you think they are. Therefore, they're not great. And then what happens is they say, you want to go and see old Tom down the road there. He's doing some interesting stuff. And you go down there and it's just like mind-blowing. Okay. Nothing to do with weed control, but mind-blowing. You know what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, that's where I bumped into the first time Joel Salatin and met and went there. And it was like, wow, how you're using all these enterprises and enterprise stacking at the time and that sort of thing. And there were some guys I don't even know their names, if I'm honest, in California, doing some amazing veg growing and just doing it in a way that was actually not so intensive or destructive. And they were like, yeah, we're saving the planet, and not so much that, but we started talking about soils. People started talking to me about soil. I never talked.
Okay, so as I said, when that started, right?
And everyone was like, if you've got a healthy soil, you can grow a healthy plant. You've got a healthy plant, then it actually can resist pest and insect attack. And a healthy soil can hold more moisture. So in actual fact, in the summers, you don't need your irrigation as much. And it can actually exchange all these nutrients that are all in this great big deep freeze of soils that are, if they're chemically killed, then you haven't got the biology. And that all of a sudden people started talking to me about microbes, not just earthworms now. We're talking about protozoas. We're talking about bacteria.
I could always look inside your brain at this time. I reckon it's going overdrive.
I mean, let's put it this way. After 6 weeks, I got on an airplane, and on the way home, I was planning my next route, or my next trip. And I was like, I have got an opportunity here. I have learned so much. More so, people had sowed seeds in my head, and so, shown me and yeah, seeing and chatting and that sort of thing. And of course, then it was off to South America, then Africa. And then I took my mother on that trip of a lifetime where you wouldn't do it now, would you? But caught the train from our local train station. We trained it to Hong Kong.
Oh, amazing.
All through Russia.
I wish we had 2 hours of this. Will you come back and do another one with me? Because I think there's so much more of this we want to do. But let's do the abridged version for now. So we go through your Nuffield. Yeah. I think we could do a whole podcast just on your Nuffield, to be honest. But so you go through your Nuffield. You publish it in May 2017, and then in essence you get to work. You've also had some more Jobe stresses since then as well, with the legal case and everything, which we won't go into now, but maybe in a future podcast. What did the rest of 2017 look like for you after the Nuffield?
A wrestle. I was an agronomist advising agrochemicals and fertilizers and seed treatments and firmly believed that everything I was doing there was all the right things. And then I was at home looking at soils and biology and just starting to consider the whole change. And this had started in 2015, because of course my first trip was 2015, not 2017. So okay. Yeah, if you sort of mean. So it was like end of 2014. So it was more of a transition than just like the day of 2017. But by 2017, yes, the farm was on a kind of a much different steer of the River Wye was being polluted by phosphates. I thought, obviously, I don't want to be contributing to this problem. I want my children to have a river that they could be proud of in years to come. I believed our soils were the most important thing on our farm, for years. Let's be honest, like the erosion and stuff that happened on our farm was horrific, like everybody else in the Wye Valley, but the nation too, and treated as as I said, a substrate. And all of a sudden I was like, I want to build soils. I want to, and people are starting to get a little bit angry of the word regenerative, and we should just call it farming. And my response to this is, you tell me you're regenerating something, so you're building soils, you're building a better environment, you're building better water quality in the watercourses, and we'll call it farming. Until farming is doing that, this is going to be called regenerative. Okay, because sustainability is no good. I can't sustain where I was. The soils were in a terrible state. I need to rebuild, regenerate, restart. So that's why regenerative, I think, is kind of became a massive word. Then people start getting angry about it, as people love to get angry about all sorts of things.
Oh, they do.
But oh yeah, absolutely. So, and then of course in my day job as an agronomist, I was doing pretty much the opposite.
Yeah.
And I was in this wrestling thing, and it all came to a head. I think it was like 2018. One of my clients in Tewkesbury said, "We don't like the way we farm. Me and my wife are not happy with all of this." And I never forget, I wrote a presentation basically in defense of what I was doing as an agronomist. And I never forget driving up their drive, and I got halfway up to open the gate, and I deleted the presentation.
Wow.
And I walked into their kitchen, and I sat down and I said, "Listen, this is what I was going to say, but in actual fact, what I'm going to talk to you about is what I found on my Nuffield and what I'm doing on my farm." And they were amazing, and they just said, number one, fortunately they got other interests, and they said, this farm needs to break even, doesn't need to show a profit, but you do what you need to do here to learn as much as you need to learn, and take those learnings. We want to support everything you just spoke about for I think I was in there 3 hours, discussing. So, and they were amazing people, Troutman family. Then quite incredibly, every other client I had that I thought was really, a proper, full, intensive, blah, 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 they all start asking and talking. And before you know it, they're all like, no, we got to do way more with the soils, and we've got to do way more with this. And it just became that whole thing of, we need to change the way we are. And essentially what then happened was, I was still working for Hutchinson's at the time. I had a wonderful conversation with David Hutch, and that's the beauty of Hutchinson's as a family business. And I said, David, I feel a bit torn. And he was brilliant. And he basically said, listen, if you want to go on your own, you do that, we'll support you. And what we'd like you to do is some consultancy for us on this, because we can't move as quick as you. We're a much bigger company, so these things don't happen. And we've stayed. I've stayed quite close to a lot of the guys in Hutchinson's and with the board and managers and that sort of thing. And and I think there's an awful lot to be said for what they're trying to get over the line these days as well. So I take my hat off to a lot of that. And that's where 2.5 years ago I set up Regen Ben.
Yeah. So I mean, on that for a bit, let's talk a little bit about chemistry, because we speak of soil management in terms of biology, chemistry, and physics. So what if the future is regenerative? If the future is regenerative, what is the future of chemistry in that sort of context?
Okay. So really interesting that you brought up the subject of chemistry and soil, and this is the massive confusion part of that, and it's ridiculous, really. Chemistry of soil has nothing to do with pesticides at all. Chemistry of soil, and this is what we need to talk about far more, and funny enough, I do an awful lot of talking about this. What we need to understand with chemistry of soil is a lot of the elements that we find in soil are not just there for plant food. Calcium, magnesium, potassium, and sodium, especially those four, are the chemistry that we're talking about generally when we're talking about the chemistry of soil in terms of chemistry, physics, biology, because those four elements have a huge influence on how a soil behaves structurally. Calcium will open a soil up and allow drainage. Magnesium squeezes the soil together. Potassium will stack a soil, and sodium collapses the soil or compresses it downwards. And essentially, if we know what we're blessed with in totals, these aren't plant available nutritions, this is total amount of nutrition, we know how a soil is likely to behave. And therefore, in actual fact, we can make chemical adjustments if we need to, of those elements, to actually allow us to use mechanics or physics, so that obviously machinery, and then obviously allowing biology to become more involved. What a lot of people are doing, unfortunately, is just grabbing them, going and buying a brand new drill, going no-till and then watching their soils really not react very well at all, yields drop off, or we've got to go through a 4 or 5 year drop off before biology comes in. You can really help that by managing the chemistry.
That's nice.
Again, you said chemistry, physics, biology. You work with all three, not with just one. Funny enough, when you go one-dimensional farming, you end up with problems.
Well, again, there are so many directions I want to take them. Why do we not have more time this morning? It's annoying. But let's just talk about soils for a bit, because I mean, again, you've spoken. I
didn't answer your question on pesticides, to be fair. But we'll come back to that.
No, it's okay. It's okay. Yeah, we can go back to it. Yeah. So you have spoken previously about your concern for the productivity value of grade 3 soils, especially in places like Bedfordshire, Oxfordshire, sort of that part of the world. How concerned are you for soils in the UK, and what does concern actually mean as well?
I'm concerned that the concern I have most is that, worryingly, it was only 30 years ago that the 100 horsepower tractor, normal tractor on a farm, and most tractors were between 60 and 80 horsepower. And we have now got to 400 and 500, 600 horsepower tractors pulling tillage trains, because the soils have become harder and harder and harder to work into any kind of seed bed, because we have kept oxidizing and oxidizing and oxidizing, ruining structure, removing organic matter, and organic matter being the trump card in all of this. You know, it trumps both chemistry and physics. You might have a chemically massively imbalanced soil. If it's full of organic matter, it's still holding it open. It's still allowing lots to happen. As we keep oxidizing that and keep ripping tillage chains through it, that disappears, and therefore the chemistry becomes dominant. And if you've got, say, a high magnesium clay that they have in Bedfordshire, so magnesium squeezes the soil together, you've got to use, and you've got no organic matter keeping any of it open. You've got to use bigger and bigger, heavier machinery to try and rip it open to allow you to get a seed in. So I'm concerned in the fact that the amount of diesel required. I've just done, funny enough, a presentation this morning at 4 o'clock. 10 calories of fossil fuels to produce 1 calorie of food. That's where we're at the moment. I mean, we can't. That's ridiculous. So when you start looking at these Oxfordshire, Bedfordshire clays, and not just there, but plenty of other places we're blessed with god awful clays, it's a case of actually, the biology isn't going to turn up into a clay soil that is absolutely bound together by magnesium and not allowing anything to breathe. They need oxygen, and funny enough, if you then go and rip through the tillage train, you kill the biology. So in actual fact, that's where the chemistry part steps in.
Okay,
you've got a magnesium clay soil, and you apply things like gypsum, calcium sulfate. You can actually have an effect, put a living root behind, and as that starts percolating down through the soil, the calcium sulfate, you put a living root in the soil, and living root starts exuding lots of sugar-rich amino acids, feeding biology, all of that sort of thing. Things start to change.
Ben, will you come back on the show, because there are so many other things I want to ask you about, but we're running out of time. You've got a book on the way called Moreon.
Yes.
Can you tell us any more about that? And also, how on earth have you got time to write a book on top of everything else you're doing?
Yeah, well, I was going to write kind of a manual about regen ag, and more people have kept asking me, I think you need to tell your story in the book in a bit more depth of how you started, and pretty much what we talked about today and that sort of thing, but more about the farm and where and the word moron I use all the time. It is multifaceted, of course, but we're addicted to this more and more and more and more, and you just keep putting more products on. And as I keep telling people, the bigger and bigger brown envelopes arriving and smaller white envelopes to pay the brown envelopes off. And we've got to this scenario where we're stuck on this treadmill of applying more on. And essentially, I was no different. And it's basically one man's journey, or one family's journey, certainly not one man, one family's journey to try and jump off this moron treadmill. Now, you mentioned very briefly the litigation case going on with Jobe at the moment. We're hoping that's going to come to an end shortly, because I need to.
Really?
I need. Oh yeah, we're still going on. Yeah. But we need some closure on that, or finality on that, so we know exactly where we are in the whole life, in our lives, sort of thing. Again, it's probably time for another podcast.
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, listen, in the short term, until we do our second podcast, if you want to know more details on that, there is an episode in Farming for Change where you talk a lot about that. So head over and listen to that. Yeah, we're going to have to start wrap things up. So I'm going to ask you the few questions that we ask everyone at the end of the show. The first is, Ben, if you have a message for the public, any message, what would it be?
As a regenerative advisor, my inbox is ram full of new inquiries from new farms from all over the world every day. There is definitely a groundswell. Funny enough, in Groundswell itself, the actual event, the first time I went, I thought it needed sandals. Last year, I think they took 7,000 per day.
It was
but there's definitely there's definitely a groundswell of farmers wanting to make a change, and I think that, if nothing else, is a really nice shimmer of light that actually people are really starting to make an effort. So that'd be my message to the public.
And your message for farmers?
Message to farmers is the journey, the regenerative journey is good, but just try and get some alignment in your own mind, and I'm happy to try and help. I don't particularly want to take on any more work. Having said that, I'm
not surprised.
I'm just because of the chemistry, biology, and physics thing. What I find is a lot of clients get into a real muddle of listening to 10 podcasts and reading 3 books and thinking they're going to cut some kind of journey and generally get so far down it and it's gone wrong, and it's gone wrong for put the fundamentals in place first. Look at the chemistry, physics, biology. It's really quite important. So I think in my book I'm actually going to write where to start day one. Well, I've written basically a fool's guide to just getting on the journey.
And finally, the one that people sometimes struggle with, actually, your recommendation for a blog, podcast, or social media account to follow, and that can be farming or non-farming.
Yeah, do you know what? I was thinking about this earlier. I mean, I go for the obvious. John Kempf podcasts.
Yeah,
are phenomenal. What they go through and how they go through it's a massive learning resource. Would probably be right up there. Certainly helped me massively in the early days. The other thing is I would go back to some of the early episodes because there's an awful lot of very good speakers on there. So yeah, for me it'd be that. But more so, it's not part of the question, but go to Groundswell.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to tap somebody on the shoulder and have a chat. It is a farmer-led movement, which is fantastic. And the bar in an evening often gets quite lively and things like that. And but I think Groundswell is whether you put it alongside podcasts and that sort of thing, but make sure you go every year, and just keep asking questions.
Yeah, we'll see you there. Right, we'll leave it there. Ben, it's been an absolute honor having you on the show. Thank you so much. And like I said many times, there is much more to say, but thank you for giving us a glimpse into your amazing mind today.
Yeah, no worries.
Right, that's it for today. If you haven't already, please do subscribe to the show wherever you're listening and leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Next week, we will be heading to the Cambridgeshire Fens, and arable farmer Luke Ablett will be with me down on Daintree Farm. And on the Rural Business Focus podcast this week, we're talking PR, and I'm joined by Hannah Lloyd from Pinstone Communications. I'm Ben Eagle. This has been Meet the Farmers. Thank you very much for listening, and I hope you all have a great week.